Let's talk about something that stings, being ignored. You know that feeling, right? The shift in energy, the unanswered messages, the way someone who used to light up when they saw you now barely nods in your direction. It's unsettling, and it makes you question everything. Did I do something wrong? Did I change? Did they change? I want to let you in on something. When people ignore you, it's not just silence. It's communication. It might not be direct, it might not be fair, but it is a message. And that message says more about them than it does about you. We tend to think of communication as words spoken conversations, text messages, phone calls, but silence is just as much a message as a spoken sentence. When someone suddenly starts ignoring you, they may not be saying anything outright, but they are still communicating something. The problem is silence leaves too much room for interpretation. Think about it. When someone stops responding to your texts, stops making eye contact, or acts like you don't exist, what's the first thing you do? You start filling in the blanks. You start making up stories in your head. Did I say something wrong? Did they lose interest? Are they mad at me? The absence of words doesn't stop our brains from searching for meaning. In fact, it makes us search harder. But here's the key. When someone ignores you, their silence is speaking more about them than about you. It's easy to assume we are the problem, that we made a mistake or suddenly became unworthy of their attention. But in many cases, their withdrawal has nothing to do with you and everything to do with what they are going through. Maybe they are dealing with personal struggles they don't know how to share. Maybe they are overwhelmed, anxious, or emotionally drained. Or maybe they are avoiding a difficult conversation because confrontation makes them uncomfortable. Silence isn't neutral. It carries weight. It can be a form of emotional withdrawal, a way of controlling a situation, or even an unspoken boundary. Some people use silence to manipulate, while others use it as a defense mechanism. Some shut down because they are afraid of being vulnerable, while others disappear because they don't know how to express their feelings in a healthy way. Now, this doesn't mean we should excuse silence every time. If someone consistently ignores you without explanation, that's also communication. Perhaps it's their way of saying they are not invested in the relationship or don't value the connection as much as you do, and that hurts. But it's better to acknowledge that reality than to keep chasing answers from someone who has already given their response through their absence. So what do you do when someone starts ignoring you? First, resist the urge to immediately blame yourself. Instead of spiraling into self-doubt, take a step back and ask, what else could be going on here? Then, if it's someone you care about, give them space while also opening the door for honest communication. A simple, hey, I've noticed a shift, is everything okay, can go a long way. But if they continue to ignore you, remember, their silence is a choice, but how you respond is yours. You don't have to chase after someone who has already walked away. One of the hardest things to accept when someone suddenly starts ignoring you is that it might have nothing to do with you at all. It feels personal, it feels like rejection. And when something feels personal, our first instinct is to look inward, to replay past conversations, overanalyze interactions, and search for what we might have done wrong. But here's a truth that can change the way you see things. People's behavior is more often a reflection of their inner world than a judgment of yours. The stories we tell ourselves when someone pulls away, we tend to fill in the blanks with self-doubt. Maybe they don't like me anymore. Maybe I said something wrong. Maybe I'm just not good enough. But here's what we don't always consider. Maybe they are struggling with something personal and don't know how to talk about it. Maybe they are overwhelmed with life and retreating from everyone, not just you. Maybe they are carrying emotional wounds that make them afraid of closeness. The way someone treats you is a reflection of their emotional state. their beliefs, their fears, and their capacity to connect. If someone suddenly ignores you, it's rarely just about what you did. It's about how they process emotions, how they handle stress, and what they're going through. Emotional bandwidth and avoidance. Think about the last time you were overwhelmed. Maybe life was throwing too much at you, work stress, family problems, personal struggles. Did you ever find yourself pulling away from people, not because you were mad at them, but because you didn't have the emotional energy to engage? That's what happens to others too. For some people, ignoring isn't a conscious choice, it's their default reaction to emotional discomfort. They withdraw when things feel heavy. They avoid conversations that might require vulnerability. They don't have the tools to navigate emotions, so they shut down instead. This is especially true for people who were never taught how to communicate their feelings. If someone was raised in an environment where emotions weren't discussed, where confrontation was seen as conflict, or where vulnerability was a weakness, they may not know how to express what's going on inside them. Fear, insecurity, and projection. Here's another truth. Some people ignore you not because of anything you've done, but because your presence triggers something within them. Maybe you remind them of a past hurt. Maybe your confidence highlights their insecurities. Maybe your emotional honesty makes them uncomfortable because they aren't ready to be that open with themselves. People project their fears and struggles onto others all the time. A person who is struggling with self-worth might withdraw because they assume you'll abandon them eventually. Someone who is afraid of confrontation might ignore you instead of addressing an issue head-on. Someone who feels overwhelmed might ghost you, not because they don't care, but because they don't have the energy to explain why understanding this matters. When you realize that other people's actions are about them, not you, it frees you from the need to fix things that aren't yours to fix. You stop bending over backward to prove your worth to someone who was never doubting you. They were struggling with themselves. This doesn't mean you excuse bad behavior or accept mistreatment. What it does mean is that you stop internalizing their actions as a measure of your value. You stop making someone else's silence the narrator of your self-worth. Let's talk about something that makes a lot of people uncomfortable. Vulnerability. We all crave deep connections, honesty, and authenticity, yet when faced with moments of raw openness, many people shut down, withdraw, or even disappear entirely. Why? Because vulnerability is scary. Now, if you've ever had someone suddenly start ignoring you after a meaningful conversation or a moment of closeness, it might not be about you at all. It might be about their relationship with vulnerability itself. What is vulnerability, and why do some people fear it? Vulnerability is the act of being open emotionally, mentally, even spiritually. It's showing up as your true self, without walls, without masks, without the protection of pretense. And for many people, that is absolutely terrifying. Some people were raised in environments where vulnerability was seen as weakness. Maybe they grew up in a household where showing emotions led to criticism, rejection, or even punishment. Maybe they learned early on that being honest about their fears, struggles, or needs would only lead to disappointment. So instead of embracing vulnerability, they learned to avoid it. Others may have been hurt before. Perhaps they trusted someone only to have that trust broken. Maybe they opened up once and were met with judgment, betrayal, or abandonment. And so they build walls, not because they don't want connection, but because they fear the pain that might come with it. For these people, when they start feeling too emotionally exposed, they instinctively retreat. They might pull away from a friendship, stop responding to messages, or even ignore someone they care about, not because they don't value the connection, but because they don't know how to handle the depth of it. The fear of being seen, vulnerability means being seen fully, completely, without the usual defenses. And for someone who has spent their life hiding behind emotional walls, that can feel unbearable. Imagine this, you have a deep conversation with someone. Maybe they open up about something personal, or maybe you share something real about yourself. The moment feels raw, maybe even transformative, but then a few days later, they start acting distant. They stop reaching out. They ignore your texts or avoid eye contact when you see them. What happened? That moment of closeness triggered something in them. Maybe they felt exposed. Maybe they started overthinking, wondering if they said too much. Maybe they feared they would now be expected to be open all the time, and that scared them. People who struggle with vulnerability often have an internal battle. What if they think I'm weak? What if they use this against me later? What if I get too close and end up hurt? And sometimes, instead of confronting those fears, they choose the easiest escape, distance. Avoidance as a defense mechanism. Ignoring someone can be a defense mechanism against vulnerability. When someone suddenly withdraws after a deep emotional moment, it's often because they don't know how to process their feelings. They may need time to sort through their emotions, but instead of expressing that, where emotional openness is reciprocated. The bottom line, not everyone is comfortable with vulnerability. Some people will shut down when they feel too exposed, not because they don't care about you, but because they haven't learned how to navigate emotional closeness. Have you ever felt like someone was suddenly cold towards you, ignoring your texts, being distant, or acting like you had done something wrong, but you had no idea what? One minute everything seemed fine, and the next they were pulling away without explanation? If you've experienced this, there's a good chance it wasn't something you said or did intentionally. Instead, you may have unknowingly failed to meet an expectation they never actually communicated to you. This is the tricky thing about relationships, whether romantic, platonic, or professional. People often have silent expectations. They expect you to understand their needs, anticipate their feelings, or just know what they want without them having to say it. And when those expectations go unmet, they don't always address it directly. Instead, they let resentment build. The danger of unspoken expectations aren't. We all have needs, hopes, and desires in relationships. But when we assume others should just know what we need without us voicing it, we set ourselves up for disappointment. Here's how the cycle typically plays out. Someone has an expectation of you that they never express. Maybe they think you should check in on them more, invite them out, or make a certain effort in the relationship. You, unaware of this expectation, don't meet it, not because you don't care, but because you didn't know it existed. They feel disappointed, frustrated, or even betrayed. But instead of communicating this, they withdraw, ignore you, or treat you differently. You sense the shift, but don't know why. You feel like you're being punished, but you don't even know what crime you committed. This happens all the time in friendships, families, and even the workplace. A friend stops responding because they feel you don't prioritize them. A partner becomes distant because they expect you to show love in a way you didn't realize was important to them. A coworker starts acting cold because they assumed you would help with something without them asking. Why do people stay silent instead of speaking up? If expectations are normal, why don't people just say what they need? There are a few reasons. Fear of rejection. Some people worry that if they express their needs, they'll be dismissed, rejected, or made to feel like a burden. The belief that if you really cared, you would just know. Many people hold the subconscious belief that love, friendship, or loyalty should mean not having to ask. If someone truly values them, they think that person should naturally anticipate their needs. Past experiences with conflict. If someone has been in relationships where expressing needs led to arguments or invalidation, they may choose silence as a form of self-protection. Avoidance of vulnerability. Admitting that we need something from someone else can feel vulnerable. It requires honesty and openness, which can be uncomfortable for people who struggle with emotional expression. But here's the reality. Expecting people to read your mind is a recipe for resentment. Resentment grows in silence. When people don't express their expectations and instead let resentment fester, they often start behaving in passive-aggressive ways. They may start ignoring you, making sarcastic comments, or giving short, dismissive responses. They may act as though you should know what's wrong without actually telling you. And the irony, while they feel hurt and unseen, you may feel blindsided and unfairly treated. You might think, why are they acting so distant all of a sudden? Did I do something wrong? And because they won't tell you, you're left trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. How to handle unspoken expectations and resentment. If you suspect someone is ignoring you or pulling away due to unspoken expectations, here's what you can do. Gently address the shift. If you notice a friend or loved one acting distant, don't ignore it. Instead of assuming or overanalyzing, ask them directly, hey, I've noticed you've been a little distant lately. Is everything okay? I feel like something is off between us. If I've done something, I'd rather talk about it than guess. I value our relationship, and I'd love to understand if something is bothering you. Sometimes just opening the door for conversation can clear up misunderstandings. Encourage honest communication. People who struggle to express their needs often need reassurance that it's safe to do so. If you suspect someone is holding in frustration, encourage them to be open. I'd rather you tell me what's on your mind than hold it in. I can't read minds, but I do care. If something is bothering you, I'd love to hear your perspective. This shifts the conversation away from blame and toward resolution. Recognize when it's not your responsibility. Sometimes people choose to stay silent no matter how open and understanding you are. If someone refuses to communicate and instead punishes you with distance, that's not a healthy dynamic. It's not your job to decode their feelings if they refuse to share them. Set boundaries for one-sided relationships. If you notice a pattern where someone repeatedly withdraws instead of communicating, it might be time to evaluate the relationship. Healthy relationships, whether friendships, romantic partnerships, or family connections, require mutual effort. If someone consistently expects you to guess their needs without ever expressing them, that's emotional immaturity. Learn to express your own expectations clearly. Since you can't control how others handle their expectations, the best thing you can do is model healthy communication yourself. If you need something in a relationship, say it. If you feel hurt by something, express it before it turns into resentment. Clear, direct communication prevents unnecessary misunderstandings. The bottom line, unspoken expectations are one of the biggest silent killers of relationships. When people assume that others should just know what they need, they set themselves up for disappointment, and that disappointment often turns into resentment. But the truth is, most of the time, people don't ignore others out of malice. They do it because they are hurt and they don't know how to express it. If we can learn to communicate our expectations instead of assuming others can read our minds, we create stronger, healthier, and more fulfilling connections. And if someone chooses to hold on to resentment instead of communicating, that's a burden they are choosing to carry. It doesn't have to be yours. Boundaries are one of the most misunderstood aspects of relationships. Some people see them as walls that push others away, but in reality, boundaries are what make healthy, sustainable relationships possible. They define where one person ends and another begins, ensuring that both individuals feel respected, valued, and emotionally safe. If you've ever felt drained, disrespected, or taken for granted in a relationship, whether it's a friendship, family dynamic, workplace connection, or a romantic partnership, chances are boundaries were either weak or non-existent. What are boundaries and why do we need them? Boundaries are the invisible lines we set to protect our emotional, mental, and even physical well-being. They define what we are okay with and what we are not. A boundary can be as simple as, I need personal space when I'm overwhelmed. I won't answer work calls after 7 p.m. I won't tolerate being spoken to in a disrespectful way. They serve as a framework for how we expect to be treated and how we choose to engage with others. Without them, relationships can become one-sided, draining, or even toxic. Why do people struggle with boundaries? Even though boundaries are necessary, many people struggle to set them, often because they were never taught how. Here are some common reasons why. Fear of rejection or abandonment. Many people avoid setting boundaries because they fear pushing others away. They believe that saying no or expressing their needs will make people leave or stop loving them. This is especially true for those who grew up in environments where love felt conditional, where they had to constantly please others to be accepted, guilt and obligation. Some people believe that setting boundaries is selfish. They feel guilty for saying no, even when saying yes comes at the cost of their own well-being. This is common in families where self-sacrifice is glorified, where love is equated with always putting others first, even to your own detriment. People-pleasing tendencies, those who are natural caregivers or peacemakers often struggle with boundaries because they want to make everyone happy. They say yes when they mean no. They overextend themselves. They absorb other people's problems as if they were their own. Fear of conflict. Some people avoid boundaries because they don't want to upset others. They would rather tolerate discomfort than risk confrontation. But the reality is, avoiding boundaries doesn't eliminate conflict, it just delays it. Over time, resentment builds and the suppressed emotions eventually come out in unhealthy ways. Cultural and social conditioning. In some cultures or communities, setting boundaries is frowned upon. People are expected to always be available, always say yes, and always prioritize the collective over the individual. While there is value in community and connection, a lack of personal boundaries can lead to burnout, resentment, and loss of self-identity. Signs that you need stronger boundaries. Not sure if your boundaries are weak? Here are some signs that you may need to reinforce them. You feel exhausted and emotionally drained after interacting with certain people. You feel guilty when you say no, even when you know you should. You feel responsible for fixing other people's problems. You allow people to repeatedly disrespect or mistreat you. You feel like people take advantage of your kindness. You struggle to make time for yourself because you're always attending to others. You fear that if you set a boundary, people will get mad or leave. If any of these resonate with you, it's time to take a closer look at where you need stronger boundaries in your life. What happens when you don't have boundaries, whether it's staying late at work, lending money you can't afford to, or tolerating disrespect? At first, you tell yourself, it's fine, but deep down, resentment grows. You start feeling unappreciated and exhausted. You lose your sense of self. When you're constantly accommodating others, you may start losing sight of your own needs, desires, and identity. Instead of living for yourself, you live for everyone else. And over time, that takes a serious emotional toll. You become emotionally drained. When you don't set boundaries, you absorb other people's stress, drama, and problems. Over time, this leads to burnout, anxiety, and emotional exhaustion. How to start setting healthy boundaries. The good news is boundaries can be learned. If you struggle with them, here are some steps to start building healthier ones. Identify your limits. Ask yourself, what drains me? What do I tolerate that makes me uncomfortable? What do I need more of in my relationships? Your boundaries will be based on these answers. Communicate clearly and directly. Boundaries work best when they are clear. Instead of vague statements, be direct. I can't answer work emails after 7 p.m. I'm not comfortable discussing that topic. I can't lend money, but I can support you in other ways. Practice saying no without guilt. You don't have to explain or justify your boundaries. A simple no, I can't is enough. Remember, saying no to others is saying yes to yourself. Expect pushback. But stand your ground. People who benefited from your lack of boundaries may resist at first. They may guilt trip you, act hurt, or try to make you feel bad. Stay firm. People who respect you will adjust. Those who don't weren't respecting you to begin with. Start small and build up. If setting boundaries feels scary, start with small ones. Say no to minor requests before working up to bigger ones. The more you practice, the more confident you'll become. The benefits of strong boundaries. Everything changes. You begin to feel more respected. People treat you better when you define what is and isn't acceptable, more empowered. You regain control over your time, energy, and emotions. Less resentful. You no longer feel used or taken for granted. Emotionally lighter. You stop carrying other people's burdens as if they were your own. More authentic. You get to show up as you, not as who others want you to be. The bottom line, boundaries aren't about pushing people away. They're about protecting your well-being. They are an act of self-respect, self-love, and emotional maturity. When you set boundaries, you teach people how to treat you, and you create space for the relationships that truly nourish and support you. And here's the best part. The people who truly care about you will respect your boundaries. The ones who don't, they were only there for what they could take from you, not for who you truly are. At some point in life, we all encounter situations where we feel dismissed, undervalued, or outright ignored. Maybe a friend stops responding to your messages, a partner pulls away, a job undervalues your contributions, or a family member makes you feel like you're never enough. When this happens, it's easy to internalize the rejection, to wonder, what did I do wrong? Am I not good enough? But here's the truth. Your worth is not up for debate. It is not dependent on who chooses to see you, acknowledge you, or validate you. It is not something that rises and falls based on how others treat you. Your worth is inherent. It exists simply because you exist. The trap of seeking external validation. One of the biggest struggles people face is tying their self-worth to how others perceive them. We are conditioned from an early age to seek approval from parents, teachers, friends, bosses, and even strangers. Society tells us that we need external validation to feel like we matter. And when that validation is withheld, when people ignore us, reject us, or make us feel invisible, it can feel like our worth is taken a hit. Thoughts creep in. Maybe I'm not as interesting as I thought. Maybe I'm not lovable. Maybe I'm just not good enough. But here's what we often forget. People's actions towards you are a reflection of them, not you. Someone ignoring you, underestimating you, or failing to appreciate you does not decrease your worth. It only reveals their inability to see it. Why do we give others so much power over our worth? If our worth is intrinsic, why do we let other people's opinions affect how we see ourselves? There are a few reasons. Conditioning from childhood. Many of us grew up believing that our worth was tied to how well we performed, whether in school, in sports, or in meeting our parents' expectations. If we received love and praise only when we achieved something, we may have internalized the belief that we have to earn our worth. The need for belonging. As human beings, we are wired for connection. Rejection, even subtle forms like being ignored, can trigger a deep fear of not being accepted. This fear makes us question ourselves. If they don't value me, does that mean I'm not valuable? Comparison culture. In the age of social media, we are constantly bombarded with curated versions of people's lives. We see others being admired, praised, and validated, and we wonder why we're not receiving the same attention. This creates a false sense that our worth is measured by how many people approve of us. past wounds and trauma, if we've experienced abandonment, betrayal, or emotional neglect, we may have a deep-seated belief that we are not enough. When someone ignores us or treats us as less than, it can reopen old wounds and reinforce negative self-perceptions. The truth about self-worth, here's the fundamental truth. Your worth is not something that can be given to you or taken away. It is not dependent on how many people like you, love you, or acknowledge you. You are worthy even if someone ignores you. You are worthy even if someone undervalues. You are worthy even if you are not chosen, promoted, or praised. Nothing and no one can change that. What happens when you stop debating your worth? When you stop questioning your worth based on how others treat you? Everything shifts. You stop over-explaining yourself. You stop chasing after people who don't see you. You stop lowering your standards to fit into spaces that don't appreciate you. Instead, you walk away from relationships that make you feel invisible. Stop proving yourself to people who never valued you in the first place. Set boundaries without guilt because you know your needs matter. Speak up for yourself because your voice is just as important as anyone else's. Choose to surround yourself with people who genuinely see and appreciate you. This shift isn't about arrogance, it's about self-respect. It's about knowing that your value does not decrease just because someone else fails to see it. How to strengthen your sense of self-worth. If you struggle with feeling like your worth is dependent on external validation, here are a few ways to shift your mindset. Affirm yourself daily. Instead of waiting for others to affirm you, start affirming yourself. Every morning, remind yourself, I am enough just as I am. I do not have to prove my worth to anyone. My value is not determined by who acknowledges me. Detach from people's opinions. Not